Go rent an apartment. You're rich enough. My parents stole my $2.4 million mansion for my pregnant sister. My lawyer read my evidence, and they froze. I was 34 years old when I finally understood that in my family, children are not viewed as people. We are treated as investments. And within the Miller family portfolio, there were only two distinct types of assets. First, there was my younger sister, Hazel. At 20 years old, she was the speculative asset. High risk, absolutely zero return, and currently 7 months pregnant with a child whose father was completely out of the picture. But Hazel made my parents feel powerful because she constantly needed to be rescued. She was their eternal project, the fragile, golden thing that required their constant protection and endless financial bailouts. Then, there was me, Evelyn. I was the derivative asset, the bank account that had finally matured. I did not inherit a single dime of my wealth. I built my logistics consulting firm from the ground up, sacrificing my 20s to 80-hour work weeks, missed holidays, and chronic sleep deprivation. While Hazel was out crashing cars and dropping out of her third attempt at community college, I was securing corporate contracts and watching my bank balance grow. It took me a decade of relentless grinding, but I finally bought my absolute dream home. It was a beautiful, sprawling $2.4 million mansion located in the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Lake Forest, just north of Chicago. That house was not just a piece of real estate to me. It was my physical sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I felt entirely safe and in control. I had spent months agonizing over every single detail of the interior design. I imported Italian leather sofas for the living room. I had a custom mahogany dining table built. But my favorite part of the entire property was the glass-enclosed conservatory I had added to the back of the house. It was filled with rare orchids and heated floors, looking out over a private, wooded backyard. It was my quiet place. The place where I could sit with a cup of coffee and finally breathe without the weight of my family's chaotic demands pressing down on my chest. I thought that by buying a fortress made of stone and glass, I could finally keep their toxicity at bay. I was incredibly naive. I underestimated exactly how far they would go, and I severely underestimated the depths of their entitlement. It was late January, the kind of bitterly cold Chicago winter night where the wind feels like it is physically cutting into your skin. I was exhausted. I had just returned from a grueling 5-day business trip in Seattle, dealing with delayed flights, lost luggage scares, and endless boardroom meetings. All I wanted in the entire world was to walk through my heavy oak front door, run a hot bath in my freestanding tub, and sleep for 12 solid hours. The taxi dropped me off at the end of my long, curved driveway. As I dragged my suitcase up the shoveled stone path, I noticed something strange. The lights in the living room were blazing, and a car I recognized as my father Gregory's battered sedan was parked carelessly over my perfectly manicured winter shrubs. My stomach did a nervous flip. I reached the massive double front doors and punched my passcode into the electronic keypad. A harsh red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again. Denied. The code had been changed. Panic started to bubble up in my throat. Before I could reach into my purse for my physical override key, I heard the heavy deadbolt slide open from the inside. The door creaked open just a few inches, held firmly in place by the thick brass security chain I had installed for my own safety. Standing on the other side of the gap was my mother, Florence. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the visual information. She was wearing my custom-tailored, emerald green silk robe, the one I had bought for myself in Paris. She had a glass of my expensive red wine in her hand. Behind her, I could hear the faint sound of the television playing loudly in the living room. I could hear Hazel's distinct, whiny laugh echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I looked down at the freezing stone porch and suddenly realized that my 2 spare designer suitcases were sitting off to the side, hastily packed and abandoned in the cold. "Mom?" I shivered, wrapping my coat tighter around myself. "What are you doing here? Why is my code not working? Let me in, it is freezing out here." Florence took a slow sip of my wine. She did not look apologetic. She looked triumphant. She looked me dead in the eye, her expression completely flat, and delivered a sentence that will echo in my head for the rest of my life. Go rent an apartment, Evelyn. You are rich enough to afford it. Your sister is nesting, and she needs a stable, warm home to raise her baby. Not a cold, empty museum meant for a career woman. I could not breathe. My lungs forgot how to function. Are you insane? I yelled, my voice cracking as the freezing wind whipped my hair across my face. This is my house. I own this house. Open this door right now. Don't cause a scene, Evelyn, she whispered harshly, her eyes narrowing. We engaged the deadbolt and the chain for Hazel's safety. She cannot handle the stress of your temper right now. Be a good sister for once in your life. We will talk about this when you calm down. And then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just successfully cornered her prey. With a heavy, echoing thud, my mother slammed the heavy oak door right in my face. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I stood there, shivering violently on the porch, locked out of the $2.4 million fortress I had paid for in blood, sweat, and tears, while my family comfortably stole it from the inside out. I did not bang on the door. I did not scream. The shock was so profound that it acted like a physical anesthetic. I numbly grabbed the handles of the 2 suitcases my mother had thrown out onto the porch and began walking down the driveway. The snow was starting to fall heavier now, coating the dark Chicago streets in a layer of deceptive, quiet white. I dragged my bags 3 blocks down the main road until I reached a luxury boutique hotel. I walked into the warm, brightly lit lobby feeling like a ghost. I handed the receptionist my platinum credit card and checked into a corner suite. It cost $400 a night. It was a beautiful room. It had crisp, clean white sheets, a massive television, 24-hour room service, and a stunning panoramic view of the glowing city lights. But as I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed without even taking off my winter coat, the luxury felt completely sterile. It felt like a hospital room. All I could think about was the agonizing mathematics of the situation. I was sitting here, paying $400 every single night to sleep in a stranger's bed, while Florence, Gregory, and Hazel were comfortably lounging on my Italian leather sofas, drinking the wine I had collected, and adjusting the thermostat of the home I had spent 10 years saving to buy. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I pulled a chair up to the floor-to-ceiling window and just watched the snow fall over the city. I tried to mentally trace the timeline backwards, trying to understand how we had arrived at this horrific point. How could parents do this to their own flesh and blood? But as the hours ticked by and the sky began to turn a bruised, pre-dawn purple, the denial faded away. Deep down in the darkest part of my gut, I already knew the answer. This was not an impulsive decision made by desperate parents trying to help a pregnant daughter in a moment of panic. No. The changed security codes, the carefully packed suitcases, the sheer, unapologetic audacity of Florence standing in my silk robe. This was a highly calculated liquidation event. A hostile takeover of my life. I had built a beautiful, shining castle, and they had simply decided that they deserved to live in it more than I did. To truly understand why I did what I did to them in the end, you have to understand the precedent they had set. My parents had a long, established history of treating my bank account as a communal family fund. The absolute worst offense, the one that broke something fundamental inside of me, happened exactly 2 years before they stole my mansion. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. It was my father, Gregory. He was calling from a hospital room, and he was weeping hysterically. He told me his arteries were severely blocked, and he needed an emergency triple bypass surgery to survive. Then he dropped the bomb. His health insurance policy was complete garbage. He had intentionally let the premium payments lapse for 6 months because he needed the cash to pay for Hazel's second drunk driving defense attorney. He told me the hospital required a massive upfront payment or they would delay the surgery, and he was terrified he was going to die right there in the bed. I did not even hesitate. I did not lecture him. I did what a good, dutiful daughter is supposed to do. I immediately wired $52,000 directly from my business account to the hospital's billing department to cover the surgery, the hospital stay, and the subsequent physical rehab. I completely drained my personal emergency fund. I ate cheap noodles for 3 months to recover the cash flow for my business. But I told myself it was worth it. I had saved my father's life. 3 months later, I drove out to their small, cluttered house for Thanksgiving dinner. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw it. Sitting proudly on the cracked concrete, shining under the autumn sun, was a brand new, fully loaded SUV. It even had a stupid, giant red bow taped to the windshield. When I walked into the kitchen, Florence was beaming. "Look at Hazel's new car," she chirped happily, stirring a pot of gravy. She really needs reliable transportation for her new job at the mall. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Gregory, who was sitting at the table reading a newspaper. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "How on earth did you afford a brand new SUV? You just had major heart surgery." Gregory lowered the paper. He looked me dead in the eye. The surgical scar on his chest was still raw and pink beneath his unbuttoned flannel shirt, the exact surgery I had paid for. "Oh, we had some leftover cash," he said casually, not even blinking. "We moved some things around and made it work. Family helps family, Evelyn." They did not have leftover cash. They had my cash. The hospital bill had only been $30,000. They pocketed the rest. The money I had desperately sent to literally keep his heart beating had quietly become a bonus check to fund my sister's reckless lifestyle. That was the exact moment the illusion shattered. I realized they did not see my money as mine. I was not a person with property rights. I was simply a holding account. Sitting in that sterile hotel room, watching the sun rise over the frozen city, I finally put the puzzle pieces together. They knew exactly what they were doing when they brought Hazel into my home. They weren't just housing a pregnant woman, they were tactically deploying her. They were using her biology as a human shield. Gregory and Florence knew my personality perfectly. They knew that despite my cold, corporate exterior, I had a conscience. They were banking heavily on the fact that I would not call the police and physically drag a woman in her third trimester out into a literal blizzard. They knew the optics of that situation would completely destroy me. If the neighbors saw it, or if somebody filmed it and put it on the internet, I would be the villain. I would be the heartless, greedy millionaire sister throwing an unborn baby out into the freezing snow. They were using society's natural sympathy for pregnant women to completely insulate themselves from the consequences of their theft. They were weaponizing morality against me, fully expecting my guilt to be stronger than their greed. But as I sat there, drinking terrible hotel coffee, the lingering guilt from my childhood finally evaporated. The ghost of the daughter who just wanted her parents to love her finally died. In her place, the logistics consultant took over. The woman who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts with ruthless corporate sharks. If my family wanted to treat my home like a hostile corporate takeover, then I would treat them like a hostile entity. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, I picked up my phone and called Benjamin. Benjamin is my lead corporate attorney. He is not a family lawyer. He is a shark who specializes in destroying people who breach contracts. I told him everything. I told him I wanted the police, the county sheriff, the SWAT team, anyone. I told him I wanted them forcefully removed from my property before noon. "Evelyn, take a breath and listen to me," Benjamin said, his deep voice dropping an octave, instantly killing my momentum. "You have a massive problem here, and brute force is not going to solve it." "It is my house, Benjamin," I snapped into the phone, pacing the length of the hotel room. "I have the deed. I pay the property taxes. I pay the mortgage. Just file a trespassing charge." "It does not matter what the deed says right now," Benjamin replied calmly, the cold reality of the law dripping from his words. "Your doorman made a fatal error. He recognized your parents from previous visits, and he let them up. He granted them access to the private elevator. Because they entered without breaking a window or picking a lock, in the eyes of Illinois state law, they are not burglars. They are not criminal trespassers." I stopped pacing. "What are you talking about?" "They locked me out. They have established what the courts call a color of tenancy," he explained patiently. "And here is the absolute worst part, Evelyn. You have a pregnant woman inside the house, and it is the middle of winter in Chicago. The city has incredibly strict winter eviction moratoriums to prevent people from freezing to death on the streets. I promise you, There is not a single housing court judge in this entire state who will sign an emergency eviction order to remove a pregnant woman in January. It is legally impossible. I felt my knees go weak. I sank down onto the edge of the hotel bed. So, what are you saying? How long? If we file the paperwork today and do everything strictly by the book? I could hear him tapping a pen on his desk. We are looking at 6 months minimum. More likely 8 months before we can get a sheriff deputy to physically remove them. 8 months. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. 8 months of Florence sleeping in my bed. 8 months of Hazel spilling food on my imported rugs. They will absolutely gut the place, Benjamin, I whispered, feeling sick to my stomach. They will sell my art. They will destroy the conservatory. They know that, Evelyn, Benjamin said quietly. Your father is not stupid. He knows you care about your property. They are counting on you settling out of court. They want you to get so desperate and exhausted that you write them a massive check just to make them leave. This is not a misunderstanding. It is a legal shakedown. I hung up the phone and stared blankly at the wall. My parents had outmaneuvered me perfectly. They had manipulated the legal system's protections for the vulnerable to legally protect their own theft. They thought they had won. They thought I would write a check, cry about it in therapy, and move on, because that is what the derivative asset always does. They forgot one very important thing. I don't just sign contracts for a living. I find the hidden loopholes that completely destroy the other side when they try to screw me over. If housing court was a brick wall, I was not going to smash my head against it. I was going to bypass the housing courts entirely. I needed a nuclear option. Before we get to the absolute destruction of the Miller family, please take a quick second to hit the like button on this video, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this story out to more people, and I truly appreciate your support. Now, let me tell you exactly how I set the trap. For the next 3 days, I did absolutely nothing. I did not bang on the heavy oak door of my mansion. I did not call the local police department. I did not text my mother, Florence, to beg for my winter clothes. I simply went completely dark. I took my phone, blocked every single number associated with my family, and sat in my sterile $400 a night hotel room. I ordered room service, drank black coffee, and began constructing the trap. You see, if you want to catch a vulture, you have to play dead. I knew that my parents were sitting in my $2.4 million home, drinking my expensive wine and waiting for the inevitable explosion. They were waiting for me to show up with tears streaming down my face. They were waiting for the angry text messages, the legal threats, the desperate bargaining. Abusers thrive on that kind of frantic energy. It makes them feel powerful. It validates their control over you. By giving them absolute, suffocating silence, I was doing 2 things. First, I was starving them of the drama they desperately craved. Second, I was lulling them into a false sense of absolute security. I did not completely disconnect, though. I am a logistics consultant. I always monitor my assets. I used a burner email address to create an anonymous social media account just so I could keep an eye on Hazel's public Instagram page. Watching her stories was a masterclass in psychological torture. I watched a video of Hazel propping her swollen, bare feet up on my imported Italian leather coffee table. The caption read, "Finally settling into our forever home." I saw pictures of Florence cooking bacon in my pristine, custom-built chef's kitchen, grease splattering all over the marble backsplash I had painstakingly chosen. I saw a photo of Gregory smoking a cheap cigar inside my glass-enclosed conservatory, right next to my delicate, rare orchids. A younger, weaker version of myself would have completely lost my mind. I would have driven over there and thrown a brick through the window. But the woman sitting in that hotel room felt nothing but a cold, calculating focus. I was studying them. I needed to understand their mindset for the next phase of the plan. My parents had one massive, fatal flaw. It was not just their overwhelming greed, though that was certainly vast. Their ultimate weakness was their absolute arrogance. Gregory and Florence genuinely believed that they were the smartest people in any given room. They firmly believed that the rules of society, the legal system, and basic human decency were just mild suggestions meant for other, lesser people. They thought they had outsmarted a multimillionaire corporate consultant simply by changing a keypad code and exploiting a pregnant woman. I needed them to stay exactly in that arrogant headspace. Arrogant people do not read the fine print. Arrogant people do not look over their shoulders. And most importantly, arrogant people always take the bait when you offer them exactly what they want. On the morning of the fourth day, it was time to make my move. It was a Tuesday, right around 10 o'clock in the morning. I knew Gregory well enough to know he would be sleeping comfortable in the king-sized bed I had paid $10,000 for. I purchased a cheap burner phone from a convenience store down the street, dialed his number, and waited. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. "Hello." His voice was thick with sleep and irritation. "Dad," I said. I did not use my normal, assertive boardroom voice. I took a deep breath and completely altered my tone. I shrank myself down. I made my voice sound incredibly small, trembling, and entirely defeated. I dug deep into my own trauma and channeled every single ounce of insecurity and desperation I had felt when I was a 12-year-old girl just begging for a scrap of his approval. "Dad, it's Evelyn," I whispered, letting out a perfectly timed, shaky exhale. "I am just so tired. I cannot do this anymore. I am exhausted from fighting. I can't fight you and Mom and Hazel anymore. You win. You guys win." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Then I heard it. A soft, self-satisfied huff of breath. It was the sound of a predator gloating over a kill. "Well," Gregory said, his voice suddenly sounding wide awake and dripping with condescending authority. "It is about time you finally came to your senses, Evelyn. We are family. We are the Millers. We should never be fighting over something as silly as a roof over our heads. Your mother and I were very disappointed in your selfish behavior the other night." I dug my fingernails into my palm to stop myself from screaming. "I know, Dad. I know I overreacted," I lied, my voice dripping with fake remorse. "I have been doing a lot of thinking in this hotel room. I want Hazel to be safe. I want the baby to have a good home. So, I am going to transfer the deed of the house to you and Mom. I want to put the mansion entirely in your names. That way, the family is secure, and I can just walk away and move on with my life." "That sounds very sensible, sweetheart," he said, trying incredibly hard to hide the giddy excitement vibrating in his chest. He was already doing the math. $2.4 million in pure real estate equity was about to drop right into his lap, completely for free. He thought he had completely broken my spirit. "But, Dad," I said, my voice catching slightly, "there is a massive problem. A legal one." "What kind of problem?" His tone immediately sharpened, the greed flashing through the phone line. "I talked to my lawyer about signing the deed over to you," I explained, keeping my voice frantic and worried. "He said that if I just give you a $2.4 million house for nothing, the federal government is going to treat it as a luxury gift. The IRS gift tax bill will be astronomical. It will be hundreds of thousands of dollars. You and Mom would literally have to sell the mansion the second I give it to you just to pay off the federal taxes. We cannot do a direct transfer." I heard the mattress springs creak as he sat bolt upright in my bed. "We cannot pay a tax bill like that, Evelyn. You know we are on a fixed income. What are we supposed to do?" "I know, Dad, I know," I said, playing the role of the desperate fixer. "But do not panic. My lawyer is very smart, and he figured out a legal workaround. We just have to make it look like you actually bought the house from me years ago. We have to make it look like you gave me the money for the initial down payment, and I was just holding the deed in my name as a formality." "Okay," Gregory said slowly, cautious, but intensely curious. "How exactly do we do that without giving them money?" "It is just standard corporate paperwork," I assured him smoothly, injecting just enough legal jargon to confuse him but keep him engaged. "It is called a source of funds affidavit. When I bought the mansion, the down payment was exactly $480,000 in cash. All you and Mom have to do is sign a sworn legal statement saying that the $480,000 was actually your money. You just state that you kept it in private cash savings over the decades, and you gave it to me to secure the property. If we sign that, I continued, my voice steady and encouraging, the transfer looks like a simple return of equity. The IRS sees it as your original investment maturing, and there is absolutely zero gift tax. You get the house free and clear. He hesitated. For one brief, terrifying second, I thought he might actually use his brain. This was the ultimate smart villain check. Gregory was not a completely stupid man. He had been around the block enough times to know that lying on official legal documents was a bad idea. "Does the government see this paper?" he asked, his voice dropping to a paranoid whisper. "I do not want the IRS or the federal government poking around my personal banking history, Evelyn. You know how they are." "No, Dad, absolutely not," I lied without missing a single beat. "This is strictly an internal document for the Neighborhood Homeowners Association and the private title company. It just sits in a dusty filing cabinet in a management office downtown to justify the name change on the deed. It is just a formality to protect you and Mom." I held my breath. The silence stretched on for 5 agonizing seconds. "All right," he finally said, letting out a loud sigh of relief. "Send the paperwork over to us. Let us get this done so Hazel can start painting the nursery." "Actually," I replied gently, "my lawyer requires all property transfers over $2 million to be signed in his office, just for insurance purposes. I will have his secretary schedule a time for you and Mom to come downtown." He grumbled about the traffic, but he agreed. I hung up the burner phone and tossed it onto the hotel bed. He took the bait completely. He truly thought he was outsmarting the tax man. He thought he was helping me help him steal my own house. But Gregory had completely forgotten the golden rule of high-stakes corporate negotiation. You never, ever sign a document until you know exactly what the person sitting across the table is holding in their hand. While my attorney, Benjamin, was busy drafting the deadly affidavit, I was doing exactly what I should have done years ago. I was digging through my parents' financial history. I did not need to hire an expensive private investigator, and I certainly did not need to hack into any secure banking mainframes. People are incredibly foolish. They put their entire miserable lives on the public record, assuming that no one will ever care enough to look. I sat at the small glass desk in my hotel room, opened my laptop, and logged directly into the federal court record system, known as PACER. It is the public access to court electronic records database. Anyone with a credit card can access it. I typed in the names Gregory and Florence Miller. I was not looking for hidden wealth. I knew my parents did not have secret offshore bank accounts or hidden trust funds. They were chronically broke because they were lazy and entitled. No, I was looking for the exact opposite. I was looking for the legally documented absence of money. I scrolled through years of minor civil disputes, unpaid parking tickets, and small claims court filings. And then, right there on the 3rd page of the search results, I found the Holy Grail. It was a single PDF file, time-stamped exactly 6 months prior. The title read, "In re. Gregory and Florence Miller. Chapter 7 Bankruptcy Discharge. Northern District of Illinois." My heart started hammering violently against my ribs. My hands were actually shaking as I clicked the link. I paid the 10 cents per page fee to download the federal document, saving it directly to my encrypted hard drive. I opened the file and began to read. It was an absolute massacre of terrible financial decisions. Page after page listed their failures. Maxed out credit cards from department stores, defaulted personal loans, unpaid medical bills, and years of accumulated nonsense. They had successfully petitioned the federal government to wipe out nearly $80,000 of consumer debt. But I did not care about the money they owed. I only cared about the assets they claimed they had. I scrolled down to the section titled Schedule A-B, Property. In a federal bankruptcy filing, you are legally required to list absolutely everything you own of value. The courts need to know if you are hiding assets that could be sold to pay back your creditors. They ask about checking accounts, savings accounts, stocks, bonds, jewelry, and even cash hidden under the mattress. I looked at line 17, cash on hand. Their official, typed answer was $0. I looked at line 20, other financial assets. Their official, typed answer was $0. I scrolled to the very bottom of that specific page, right beneath their digital signatures. There it was. The warning printed in bold, uncompromising black letters. I declare under penalty of perjury that the information provided in this schedule is true and correct. I sat back in the uncomfortable hotel chair and stared at the glowing laptop screen. A cold, hard, genuine smile slowly spread across my face for the first time in almost a week. The trap was absolutely perfect. The paradox was inescapable. Exactly 6 months ago, my parents stood before a federal bankruptcy judge and swore on their lives that they were completely destitute. They swore under the penalty of perjury that they had 0 assets, 0 savings, and 0 cash on hand. Also, the government would legally erase $80,000 of their debt. And tomorrow afternoon, I was going to make them sit in a room and sign a brand new document. A document that would be video recorded and notarized. A document swearing that at that exact same time, they were actually sitting on a secret cash stockpile of $480,000. They could not possibly be both. They could not be entirely broke for the federal bankruptcy court and incredibly rich for the suburban mansion deed transfer. If they signed my new affidavit, they were explicitly confessing to federal bankruptcy fraud. In the United States, hiding hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash during a Chapter 7 bankruptcy is a massive felony. It carries a penalty of up to 5 years in a federal prison, a fine of up to $250,000, and the immediate seizure of any newly discovered assets. They were completely trapped by their own desires. Their overwhelming greed demanded that they take the $2.4 million house. To get the house without paying taxes, they had to legally claim the cash. And to claim the cash, they had to admit to a federal felony on camera. I attached the downloaded bankruptcy file to an encrypted email and sent it to Benjamin. My message was short and to the point. The trap is set. Book the court reporter and set up the cameras. It is time to give my family exactly what they asked for. Benjamin's law firm was located on the 42nd floor of a sleek, glass skyscraper in downtown Chicago. The conference room did not look like a place where estranged families gathered to hold hands and reconcile. It looked exactly like a place where hostile corporate entities went to be slaughtered. It was entirely chrome, dark mahogany, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the frozen city below. It was an intimidating room that cost $600 an hour just to sit in. I arrived an hour early to ensure everything was perfect. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. I folded my hands neatly in my lap, feeling my pulse steady and slow. To my immediate right sat Benjamin, looking like a vulture in a bespoke charcoal suit, organizing a stack of blue-backed legal documents. In the corner of the room, an official court reporter was quietly setting up her stenography machine, her fingers hovering over the keys. Next to her, a professional videographer was adjusting the height of a heavy tripod, carefully focusing a high-definition lens directly on the 2 empty leather chairs positioned directly across the table from me. This was not going to be a casual family signing. We had formally staged the room to look like a highly official deposition of facts. I had told Gregory the neighborhood association was so incredibly exclusive that they required sworn, recorded testimony to prove the down payment money was not laundered by criminals. It was a complete lie, of course. The neighborhood association did not care where the money came from. But the federal government certainly would. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy glass elevator doors down the hall slid open. My family walked into that corporate conference room as if they were royalty arriving at their own coronation. The sheer level of unearned arrogance radiating from them was suffocating. Gregory was wearing his only Sunday suit, the cheap navy blue one he usually reserved for funerals and bank loan applications. He puffed his chest out, trying to look like a titan of industry who belonged on the 42nd floor. Florence walked in right behind him, and the sight of her almost made my blood boil over. She was wearing a beautiful, vintage fur coat. I recognized it immediately. It was a piece I had purchased at an exclusive estate sale 3 years prior. She had casually raided my private closet before coming downtown to steal my house. Behind them, Hazel waddled into the room. She had one hand resting dramatically on her pregnant belly and the other holding a massive iced coffee. She did not even bother to look at me. She was too busy staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows, already calculating how good this sweeping city view would look on her Instagram page. They sat down heavily in the leather chairs opposite me. They did not say hello. They did not ask how I was holding up or if I had found a decent place to stay after they locked me out in a blizzard. Their lack of empathy was absolute. Gregory simply drummed his fingers impatiently against the mahogany wood and glared at Benjamin. "Let us get this over with, counselor," he said, using a word he had probably heard on a television show. "The traffic coming in from the suburbs is absolutely terrible, and my pregnant daughter needs to get back home to rest." "Water," Florence added sharply, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a glass pitcher sitting in the center of the table. She looked directly at me. "Evelyn, pour your sister a glass of water. She is dehydrated." I did not move a single muscle. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact. I just sat there in silence, watching them perform their pathetic charade. Benjamin cleared his throat. In the dead silence of the room, the sound was as sharp and commanding as a judge's gavel striking a wooden block. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Benjamin began, his deep voice completely devoid of any warmth or pleasantries. "Before we proceed with the transfer of the deed, I need to establish the ground rules for this meeting. This is a legally binding, sworn affidavit. The court reporter in the corner is transcribing every single word you say. The video camera is recording this proceeding for the official legal record. Do you understand?" We know. Gregory waved a hand dismissively in the air, clearly annoyed by the formalities. "Evelyn already explained it. It is for the neighborhood board. Just give me the pen so we can sign the thing and leave." Benjamin did not budge. He slowly slid a thick, crisp white document across the polished wood. It was the source of funds affidavit. "Sir, as an officer of the court, I am legally required to issue a formal warning before you sign this document," Benjamin said, locking his cold, unblinking eyes with my father's. "You are about to swear, under the penalty of perjury, that you personally held $480,000 in physical cash savings. You are further swearing that you provided these specific funds to Evelyn Miller for the purchase of the property. If this statement is found to be untrue, or if it directly conflicts with any other federal financial filings you have made, you could face severe felony charges. Do you understand the gravity of what you are signing?" The room went completely dead silent. The faint, mechanical hum of the video camera in the corner seemed to grow incredibly loud. This was their absolute last chance. This was the final off-ramp. A smart villain, or even a remotely cautious person, would have backed down. A rational human being would have heard the phrase "federal financial filings," remembered the bankruptcy, and thrown the pen down. But Gregory did not hear a legal warning. He heard a challenge from a man in a better suit. He looked down at the document, and then he looked up at me. He did not see a dangerous trap. He just saw his derivative asset daughter trying to scare him with big, intimidating corporate words to save her precious house. His overwhelming greed was so loud it completely drowned out his basic survival instincts. Gregory actually laughed. It was a dry, incredibly arrogant chuckle that echoed off the glass walls. "I know exactly what money I have, counselor," he said smugly, picking up the heavy, silver fountain pen Benjamin had provided. "I have been saving cash in a fireproof safe under my mattress for 30 years. Uncle Sam does not need to know everything about my business, right?" He actually turned and winked directly into the rolling video camera. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Benjamin remained completely stone-faced. "State your full name for the official record and sign the document, please." "Gregory Thomas Miller," he announced, projecting his voice loudly for the microphone. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name with a massive, looping flourish. He slid the paper over to Florence. She picked up the pen. Her hand was trembling slightly, but it was not from fear. It was from the pure, unadulterated excitement of finally securing the luxurious lifestyle she felt she was always owed. She signed her name right next to his. Hazel clapped her hands softly from the corner. "Finally," she whispered, taking a loud sip of her iced coffee. They leaned back in their expensive leather chairs, smiling widely. They looked like bank robbers who had just pulled off the heist of the century. They thought they had outsmarted the IRS, the neighborhood board, the fancy lawyer, and their easy mark daughter. They had absolutely no idea they had just happily signed a federal confession. The dark blue ink on the affidavit was barely even dry when the entire mood in the conference room dropped. The atmosphere became instantly heavy and suffocating, like the terrifying pressure drop right before a tornado touches down. Gregory confidently capped the silver fountain pen, slid the signed paper back across the table toward me, and reclined with his hands laced casually behind his head. "There," he said, grinning over at Hazel. "That was not so hard. Now, sign the deed transfer over to us, Evelyn. We have movers coming tomorrow morning to rearrange the furniture." I did not touch the silver pen. I did not even glance down at the deed. I slowly looked over at my attorney. "Counselor." Benjamin gave a single, sharp nod. He reached down and opened his leather briefcase again. This time, he did not pull out a crisp white paper. He pulled out a thick, bright red accordion file. He opened it and laid a heavily stapled stack of blue-backed federal documents right in the center of the table, placing them directly on top of the fake affidavit my parents had just signed. Florence's smug smile vanished. Her face tightened with suspicion. "What is that?" "That," I said, my voice finally ringing out, loud, cold, and echoing with 10 years of suppressed rage, "is your official Chapter 7 bankruptcy discharge from the Northern District of Illinois. It is dated exactly 6 months ago." Gregory's grin did not disappear immediately. It slowly curdled into deep confusion. "So what?" "That is old news. The judge cleared our debts. We do not owe those credit card companies anything anymore." "Turn to page 4, I said calmly, not breaking eye contact. "Schedule A, the assets." I reached across the table and tapped the specific line with my index finger. "6 months ago, you stood before a federal judge and swore under oath that you had absolutely zero cash, zero savings, and zero assets. You legally told the United States government you were completely destitute so they would erase $80,000 of your debt." Then, I slowly raised my hand and pointed directly at the blinking red light of the video camera. "But exactly 5 minutes ago," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you just swore on video, also under oath, that you have been sitting on $480,000 in secret cash savings for 30 years. Total, paralyzing silence descended on the room. Hazel's eyes bounced wildly between the documents and our faces, like she was desperately trying to do the math and failing. Florence let out a tiny gasp, her hand flying up to clutch the collar of my stolen vintage coat. Gregory's skin went a sick, pale shade of ash gray. The reality of the trap finally snapped around his neck. I found the money," he stammered weakly, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. "After the bankruptcy was over. I found it in an old coat pocket." Benjamin raised a single, cynical eyebrow. "$480,000 in a coat pocket, Mr. Miller? That is quite a coat." "It was a gift," Florence blurted out, her voice pitching into a hysterical squeak. "From a very rich friend." "Then it is classified as undeclared income," Benjamin snapped back instantly, his voice cracking like a whip. "Income which you failed to report to the IRS and the federal bankruptcy trustee. And since you also confidently bragged on camera that it was mattress money saved over 30 years, you have now officially contradicted yourselves on the federal record." Gregory's heavy leather chair screeched violently against the hardwood floor as he surged to his feet. "Give me that paper back," he roared. He lunged across the wide mahogany table, desperately reaching for the signed affidavit. Benjamin slammed his hand down flat over the document, his arm rigid and unmoving. "I cannot do that, Mr. Miller. This document is now evidence." "Evidence of what?" Gregory shouted, the veins in his neck bulging dangerously. "We are just trying to help our pregnant daughter. You tricked us. You set us up." "I did not trick you," I said, my voice remaining completely steady and completely cold. "I told you the legal requirement. You eagerly chose to lie because you wanted my $2.4 million home far more than you wanted to tell the truth. You walked into this building broke, and you just made yourself a federal felon on camera while trying to steal my property." Gregory hissed something vile under his breath and took a menacing step toward me. "Sit back down," Benjamin barked, projecting pure, terrifying command. "The camera is still rolling, Mr. Miller. Every single threat you make toward my client is being recorded." Gregory collapsed back into his chair as if the bones in his legs had suddenly turned to sand. For the very first time in his life, he saw the exact shape of the consequences closing in around him. He finally realized the inescapable paradox. He could not be rich enough for the neighborhood board and poor enough for the federal government at the exact same time. Benjamin calmly adjusted his expensive cufflinks as if he were discussing the afternoon weather. "Mr. Miller, as an officer of the court, I have a strict legal duty to report," he said quietly. "I cannot ethically sit on recorded evidence of a massive federal felony. Before you even leave this skyscraper, my office will electronically file this video and this signed affidavit directly with the United States bankruptcy trustee." Florence's voice shrank to a pathetic, terrified whisper. "You cannot do this to us, Evelyn. We are your family." "I am not your family," Benjamin replied before I could even open my mouth. "I am a corporate lawyer who enjoys keeping his license to practice. And I should warn you right now. Because you just admitted to hiding substantial assets while discharging debt, the federal trustee will seek an emergency asset freeze by tomorrow morning." Benjamin leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Do you know what that means? That means every single bank account holding your name gets locked. Your small pensions will be garnished. The new SUV you bought will be seized. You will be stripped down to nothing to repay the creditors you actively defrauded." Hazel suddenly slammed her hands down on the table, rattling the water pitcher. "Stop it," she screamed, her face blotchy red and shaking with fury. "I do not care about your stupid bankruptcy. I am not leaving the mansion. I have legal rights. I am a tenant." Benjamin slowly turned his head to look at her, his expression completely flat and unimpressed. "Actually, Miss Miller, you are not a tenant." He pulled one final piece of paper from his file. "Because you gained access to the property through documented fraud and false pretenses, specifically, lying to the building staff and changing security codes without the owner's permission under Illinois state law, that immediately kills any color of tenancy claim you might have had. You are not a protected resident. You are a criminal trespasser." Benjamin checked his gold watch. "The Chicago police are already en route to the property to remove unauthorized persons. If you are anywhere near that house when they arrive, you will be arrested and booked for criminal trespass." Hazel let out a sound that was half sob, half furious shriek. Florence covered her face with her hands, openly weeping into my fur coat. Gregory just stared blankly at the wood grain of the table, his lips moving silently as if he were trying to calculate a way out of a burning room that had no doors. Then, all three of them looked up at me. The look in their eyes was a mixture of profound shock, absolute hatred, and total disbelief. They looked at me as if I had just detonated their entire lives for sport. And in a way I had. People on the internet love telling you to take the high road when dealing with toxic family. They tell you to just evict them through the courts, change the locks, go to therapy, and move on. Don't ruin them, people say. They are still your blood. But what those people do not understand is that you cannot negotiate with a tumor. If I had only evicted them, they would have sued me for years. They would have stalked my house, harassed my business, and drained me with endless legal fees and manufactured guilt until I was nothing but a hollow husk. To save my own life, I had to completely end theirs. I stood up from my chair. My legs felt incredibly heavy, but my spine did not bend an inch. I looked down at the people who were supposed to protect me. "You think this is cruel?" I asked, my voice cutting easily through Hazel's loud crying. "You are evil," Florence spat out through her tears. "You are sending your own parents to a federal prison. You are putting your pregnant sister out on the cold street." "No," I replied, grabbing my purse. "I am simply cutting you off. You are parasites. And a parasite does not stop feeding until the host is completely dead. If I leave you one single dollar, one tiny foothold, 1 inch of leverage, you will use it to try and destroy me." I met my father's broken, defeated eyes one last time. The man who had taught me from a very young age that love was nothing but a financial transaction. "This isn't vengeance, Dad," I said softly, the absolute finality ringing in the quiet room. "It is surgery. Quick, final, and entirely irreversible. I had to burn the bridge while you were still standing right in the middle of it, just so you could never, ever follow me again." I turned my back on them and walked toward the glass door. "The police will be at the house in exactly 20 minutes. I highly suggest you start driving." I did not stick around to watch them leave. I signed Benjamin's heavy retainer fee, walked out of the skyscraper, and took a private car straight to O'Hare Airport. The legal fallout hit them exactly like a hammer. The bankruptcy trustee moved far faster than even Benjamin expected. Within 48 hours, the emergency asset freeze landed on their heads. Their bank accounts were seized, Hazel's SUV was repossessed, Gregory's pension was heavily garnished, and their previous debt discharge was completely revoked. The $80,000 in erased debt came roaring back, along with massive federal fines. Ultimately, Gregory and Florence were formally charged with federal bankruptcy fraud and perjury. They were found guilty and ended up serving a 5-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Hazel was physically removed from my home that exact same night by the police. Because she had no legal lease and was a documented trespasser, she had zero protections. She spent several difficult months bouncing around state-run shelters before finally landing on the couch of a distant cousin who did not know the full story of what they had tried to pull. As for the beautiful $2.4 million mansion, I sold it to a nice surgeon and his wife. Even after the deep cleaning, I just could not breathe inside those stone walls anymore. The air felt permanently tainted by their entitlement. After paying the broker fees, I cleared a massive profit, bought a one-way first-class ticket to Europe, and completely disappeared. I changed my phone number, deleted all my old social media accounts, and built a brand new life where no one asks me for anything. To my family, I am completely gone. I am a ghost. A very wealthy, very peaceful ghost who won the war they started. Was my revenge too ruthless, or did they get exactly the karma they deserved? Am I the A**hole for sending my own parents to federal prison and putting my pregnant sister on the street? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, leave your comment, and don't forget to like the video. It really helps the channel grow so I can bring you more crazy stories exactly like this one.